know now that I'm a fighter.
Welcome, Patriots. Happy Thursday evening for a special edition of the America First Patriot Hour. Tonight we will have on a good candidate from Minnesota running for District 10, Seat 3 Judge, Nathan Hansen. POP, how are we doing tonight?
I am good. Excited to hear from him.
Yes, looking good. So we have a great show, back-to-back, so everybody last night. Corey Mills was our number one program in views at 23.4 thousand, I believe. And so far, right now, Mandy is at 18.7 thousand. So
wow.
I would say that was a very successful show.
It's wonderful because she had something important to say about dismantling the evil tentacles of our ever-present government.
Yeah, it's a couple of things that I thought of today. I had spoke to an independent journalist, and we're trying to branch out, and we're trying to get more people involved to help us from abroad. And she said, Leo, do you think they're going to win? And I said, yeah, I think Trump's going to win. She said, my concern, she goes, because I live here in D.C., is will they let him come back to the White House? She said, or will he have to run the presidency from Mar-a-Lago? And I said, you know what? That's a great point. That is absolutely, they have hung their hat on the farce that is the January 6th insurrection, which is blowing up on them every day. Finding that feds were, in fact, in the January 6th crowd. So, what do you think about that, POP? Does that hold any water, or is that something you could see the Democrats and rhinos? Remember, McConnell stayed on when he could have left early.
As far as just using January 6th, you mean?
Well, just using it all as like he could never come to D.C. and be president again, even if he wins.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, honestly, they're so unhinged, nothing would surprise me. They're going to try not to seat him. I think it would be great if he said, hey, guess what? I'm not coming to D.C. I'm going to run. And you know what? And what are they going to say? Joe Biden has been in Delaware for, 90% of his presidency? So they certainly can't say, oh, you have to be in D.C., because Joe's been on the beach for almost his entire presidency. So they set a precedent that you most certainly do not have to be in the nation's capital to supposedly be the president. And so guess what? We'll stay where we're safe, where we can control our own security. And we'll govern from a free state instead of the hellhole that is Washington, D.C. I'm going back to Washington, D.C. this weekend for the first time in probably 15 or 20 years. I spent 8 very happy years of my life there. I now look at it as going into the belly of the beast, the capital of pure evil. And I'm kind of sickened that I have to spend time in that city, but I'm going to do it.
It's a shame what people have done to great cities.
Yep.
If you look at liberal cities,
D.C. is the city that was so stupid they elected Marion Barry after he, was on video with a whore doing crack. So, the citizens of D.C. are some of the stupidest people on the planet, and they kind of get whatever they deserve.
There's a lot of cities like that right now. So I saw earlier today, Emerson came out and Posobiec sent out showing Trump tied or +1 in every battle state, swing state. And sometimes I think it's fascinating to just watch the response of others on X, other patriots. And these people started immediately saying, how can it be? How can he be tied? This is so crazy. So I said, guys, I said, I'm not a fan of Google, but Emerson is a very left-leaning poll. So I said, here, let me do something for you. So I went back and I looked at October 2020 Emerson poll. And I juxtaposed it up against this poll. Well, Biden was up 6 points, 7 points in that poll in 2020. Now, was he really? Who the hell knows? With as much cheating, what have you seen in North Carolina? 794,000 total people removed from the registry. So you're talking millions and millions of illegal votes. And I don't care what anybody says. I truly believe that number was inflated. There's no way in hell he got 81 million votes. And, it gets proven every single day. Something new comes out, and all you have to do is have semi-intelligence, and you can do the math, and you can figure out. Like, people are pissed off, POP, because Fox News is coming out saying she's still up +2. And I'm like, do you guys not know who Rupert Murdoch is? Do you not understand that 90% of the asshats on there are rhinos or liberal?
I don't feel sorry for anyone who still watches Fox News. I haven't watched Fox News since 2016, and I don't understand why anybody would watch Fox News. So just automatically rule those people out. In addition, you said anybody with a brain or common sense. So that rules out most Democrat voters, actually all Democrat voters, and a large majority of Republican voters as well. And those are the Republican voters who keep voting in like John Cornyn in a primary. So we have a lot of really stupid people, and we're living in what happens to a country when stupidity rolls.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It is. I don't know when enough is enough, but hopefully people will get to that point. So Nathan Hansen.
You would think.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
No,
sorry.
go ahead, POP. No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I thought enough was enough during COVID. I thought enough was enough when they stole the election. But apparently for Americans, enough is never enough.
For a lot of them, no. They are so. Trust me, I see it sometimes with family. I don't understand, and it's past the point of trying to rationalize, because, like, you have to be so mind warped or brain screwed and to believe in all the shit they've told you about that guy when it's all been basically proven false. And it's like, so you're just holding on to hate for hate. Just because it makes you feel better.
Nothing they like more than hate.
Nope. So tonight we have Nathan Hansen. It is.
Sorry.
No, don't be. It is very powerful. It leads a lot of people. A lot of people are more driven by hatred than they are by trying to seek out goodness and doing the right thing.
You're correct.
That is the world we live in today. So tonight we have Nathan Hansen coming on. He's practiced law since 2003. He's done a lot of Tim Walt's cases. He'll go over a couple of them tonight. 4 years state and federal. He's done many years state and federal, and he has 4 years experience in the Minnesota Department of Corrections. So the woman he's running against, her name is Helen Brosnahan. She was appointed by Walsh in 2022. So we'll talk to Nathan. I believe he's on. So POP, I'm going to move this thing over.
All right.
Get him brought in, and then we'll get this thing started. go.
If anyone can't tell, I'm a little. Whoop, I'll stop. I was just going to say I'm a little fired up tonight.
Yes, she had an unfortunate trip somewhere, and we'll talk about it at the end of the meeting. But it's my honor to welcome in Nathan Hansen, running for Judge, District 10, Seat 3. Nathan, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Excellent.
You hear me?
I can. Well, you are in the Patriot Jungle on the America First Patriot Hour. And let me first introduce my co-host, 8 years FBI, ex-FBI. And I'm sure she's very glad about that. And we call her the Pissed Off Patriot, or the POP. Say hi.
Hi, Nathan. Hi. Welcome. I'm particularly pissed off this evening at our government, all levels, federal, state, and local. So I'm excited to hear a little bit about one of the most screwed up states. You're in one of them. I'm in one of them, Pennsylvania, and hoping you can do something to fix it.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Nice to meet you.
So, Nathan, tell us a little bit about this lady, Helen Brosnahan. She was appointed back in 2022 by one of our least favorite governors in the whole United States, Tim Walz. And I know you're very familiar with Mr. Walz. So tell us a little bit about your opponent.
I'll talk about, I have to be careful about what I say about my opponent. There are rules that we have about judicial elections. Actually, it's kind of a complicated set of rules. But I will say that my opponent, she was an assistant Dakota County attorney for many years. I think she's always worked for the government, I think for about over 20 years. And I've been in private practice for over 20 years. This seat, we have judicial elections in Minnesota. And so this seat, through a series of strange events in 2010, where the guy that had won it in a contested election in 1980, a guy named Thomas Armstrong, had tried to rig it so some say this, I got to be careful about how I say it. But he set it up where he didn't run in 2010 and then just had his law clerk file for the seat. Well, this set forth a series of events that caused like 21 people to run for this in that 2010. And she ran for it at that time, and she only got a little over 1% of the vote. A guy who I met when I was 12 years old, named Tad Jude, I first met him when I was 12 years old, won the seat at that time. And he's a Republican. He's actually running for Congress right now for Dean Phillips' old seat as a Republican. He had to retire at age 70 due to age. And then as a result of that, Tim Wall, the way that it works here, generally, unless the timing is different, within certain timing periods that the governor gets to appoint. And there's a judicial selection commission that it's selected by the governor's people, so it leans, I think, often toward the party of the governor who's appointing, and so she was appointed by Tim Walz. She was praised when she was elected in the press release by our Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, who is an interesting individual. And maybe have some acquaintance to her, given the extent of the praise. I don't know that though, but it sure seemed like it. She's had the seat for about 2 years and 7 months, and she has to stand for election. And after a couple times, and then some of my friends that appeared before, I decided that I was going to run for the seat, and for I think the first time for a race in a district as a trial court judge in Minnesota since a decision in 2002 from Minnesota that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court called Republican Party versus White, where judges are allowed to seek or seek party endorsements or recommendations, party support for the seat. I think that so I sought this party support, the Republican Party of Minnesota support, and I've received it. And I've been involved in Republican Party politics for over 15 years in Minnesota, probably more than that, maybe 20 years. And so I've activated, this is a plus 15 district if you count all the counties that it's in for red. So I'm activating all of our activists, people I've known over the years. I've done a lot of different stuff. I've known as a, you know, a lot of these people know me. I know a lot of the state reps and the state senators from the area, from these areas. And so I've received a lot of support from outstate. So I'm utilizing the party. These are very difficult to win in contested races. So you kind of have to have something extra going on. Either the judge had to have been involved in some sort of scandal or maybe committed a crime, which is not the case here with my opponent. She doesn't have that. I just decided that under these circumstances that if I was going to do this, I was going to seek party support. And that's what I've been done. I've called a Republican Party. I have a Republican Party list on an auto dialer. We've made over 7,000 calls. I myself have made over 2,500. My district is enormous geographically. It goes from all the way down to south of the Twin Cities, all the way up almost to Duluth. If you know our state, it's a very large district. And so if I do win this, it will be, I think, the first partisan use and successful use of it in Minnesota history for challenging somebody and getting this seat. But my opponent, she does, I think, in addition to the praise from Peggy Flanagan, I mean, she claims to be nonpartisan. I'd heard a rumor, somewhat from a reliable source, that the Democrats were doing a sample ballot from a retired important person from a position here. I haven't confirmed that yet. I've been trying to chase that down. By tweeting about it, I have a pretty big reach on Twitter. I think I might have shut them down doing that. And if they did do it, that would be one of the first two-sided partisan races, Republican versus Democrat, in Minnesota history. It would be the first one. I just don't have official a confirmation of that. But I looked at my opponent's Facebook page, and she had at one point her as her avatar a cartoon of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so that's a partisan thing. I mean, my view of these partisan races is that you should be honest with yourself and honest with other people about what your views are. And then in the context of those views, whatever they may be, you should be strive for fairness for people, fairness and honesty with them, and treating people with dignity and respect, and following the law, and treating people like, treating people in parties in a way that's consistent with the office is how I believe. That you would be respected, that it would be my intention to be respected by any lawyers or parties that come before me, despite my own personal views, which I'm simply honest about. I just don't lie about them and say, I don't have any views at all. I mean, I think people just have to be honest about their views and capable of self-reflection about them, and then to make decisions, against that backdrop, and be, self-aware.
Yeah, so all of us are shaped one way or the other. I was in the military, then I was in healthcare. So I've been conservative most of my life, at least since Reagan. And POP, ex-FBI, which I can't imagine how many of them would be conservative today. POP, that would probably be a low percentage. But, I think what's important, is what are the things that you think are the clear separators between you and the opponent? What is it that's going to benefit these counties that we have scrolling at the bottom of your picture there on the show? What is it that the people are looking for that you're going to be able to bring, that your actual experience in these court cases that we'll touch on a little bit, that you bring to the table?
Well, I think, first of all, as a matter of legal experience, my opponent has only just worked for the government her entire life. I have worked in private practice for over 21 years. And in that law practice, I have represented very poor people and some very rich people, and pretty much everything in between in a variety of different cases. I probably have over 100 trials. I've got 15 or 16 civil and criminal jury trials. So I've tried an attempted murder trial, and I've tried civil trials for fraud. I have a lot of varied experience, and before that, I worked for the Minnesota Department of Corrections for 4.5 years. So I have a great deal of familiarity of how Minnesota's prison system works, and also how field services works in Minnesota. That's what I worked in. So I have a sort of an extra depth of background knowledge of how a lot of these government things function. And I think that I can bring to bear. I had a conversation with a guy I know who's a judge. This is a conversation we had a long time ago. He's a judge in another county. And he said, really, nobody should ever be a judge unless they've really represented some poor people that have really been in tough circumstances. And I think that really is something that teaches you about the importance of your role to people, and the importance of having a judge who's understanding of things. I think that I can bring to bear a depth of understanding of people and the way people they are, and an empathy brought together with my life experience. To be, at least, it's probably, I'm not going to be I wouldn't be on the Supreme Court changing policy or anything, but on a day-to-day basis, I would try to be a positive, a net positive doing my job, whether it be by means of public safety or deciding, the most important disputes in people's lives. When people come to me for things, there's not a ton of people that go to court constantly. I have some clients that are regular clients, and we've always got some sort of court stuff going on because it's the nature of their business. But some people, I do a lot of bankruptcy work. I mean, bankruptcy litigation work, kind of advanced bankruptcy work in federal court. I do a lot of that now. And, these are the people's first interactions with the justice system and judges and stuff. And so I think I have a great deal of experience I can bring to bear for it. And I think an empathy, rather than somebody that just worked for the government, never really represented individuals. I mean, I've dealt with a lot of people and a lot of problems for a long time. And lawyering is really the business of other people's problems. And I also have, I've engaged in some might say lawyer activism over the years, but it's been, I've always worked in the realm of the possible. I'm not a quack. I try to maintain my professional reputation. If there's things that I'm taking on that I want to do, that there's an air of legitimacy and at least a pretty good chance of success if I do them. So,
well, empathy is a massive thing. An understanding of how to work with the public is extremely important. I know myself, and POP, I'm going to bring you in. I'd rather stand before a judge who's worked with people than work with somebody who's been in the government nonstop. Because, let's face it, what people think of the government today is not very good, not very favorable. So I would imagine that's a huge component working for you. POP, what question do you want to jump in? You have any questions or comments that you want to ask Nathan?
I'm just curious. So in the beginning, people supposedly run as nonpartisan in these elections in Minnesota. That's just so strange. First of all, in America, there's no such thing as somebody who isn't partisan anymore. Sure, you may not call it out, but we all are. And then, at least in Pennsylvania, a judge runs as a Democrat or a Republican. So is that why you said you have rules about what you can and can't discuss regarding your opposing candidate? It just seems very strange to me. I've not heard of something like that.
This is a very good question, and it's got probably not the answer you're expecting. I am, as I sit here right now, I live in Matamidi, Minnesota, which is the other side of White Bear Lake. White Bear Lake is kind of it's kind of on the east side of the Twin Cities. The other nice big lake in the cities. Minnetonka is much bigger. It's on the other side, but I'm on the other side of that, and I'm about 10 minutes from the St. Croix River. And the St. Croix River is the river that divides Minnesota and Wisconsin. So I'm 10, 15 minutes from Wisconsin. I could get in a car and get to Wisconsin in 15 minutes. The battle about Judicial that settled the question about partisan endorsements in judicial elections is a battle that was, as I mentioned earlier, was fought in Minnesota by a guy named Greg Wurzel, who was an attorney running for Supreme Court. And Minnesota had these restrictive rules where you couldn't do it. And he challenged these rules and set it all up. And it was brought all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I think there was another subsequent Supreme Court case further interpreting it. And then some I think there's a circuit court case in between it that interprets it some more. And there's sort of a complex set of rules that arose out of that. Ironically, and this is an interesting puzzle, Minnesota is a peculiar place. A friend of mine said one time that Minnesota is liberal in all the wrong ways and conservative in all the wrong ways. And in some way, and I say that to a lot of people, I'm thinking that really is true. So for whatever reason, we have 6-year terms of the judges here. They're listed as nonpartisan on the ballot, with some exceptions of some people who I don't think it was utilized by people, and I want to be careful what I say about people here. It wasn't utilized in the absolute best way that could be utilized in Minnesota after you got that decision. Well, after that decision came out, right across the border, Wisconsin has hotly contested judicial elections that are partisan, and especially on their state Supreme Court level, they have these partisan elections. And over here, the Bar Association, and then I went to this judicial candidate school for campaign finance and so forth, and they're Wisconsin, and they have these contested elections, and isn't that terrible? There's a real sense of that here. It's kind of a Minnesota groupthink type thing that these group of people get about it. When I really look at it, I've been in it for 21 years. These people who are on the bench have views. They have political views. You get decisions that look political. I think that it's just not true that most of these people are nonpartisan. I think they like to say they're nonpartisan. I think my position is just be honest about it. And so we, for whatever reason, it's a voluntary peculiarity of the populace and the lawyers in Minnesota. They haven't done this, and Minnesota, they just haven't. People haven't done it. Now, I've heard a rumor that a race in an adjoining district, that somebody who's running is using Democrat stuff against somebody who is probably a Democrat. So it's Democrat on Democrat in that county, even though it's a nonpartisan race. I'm not going to name names because that's an unconfirmed rumor, but it does appear when you look at the circumstances of that race that the challenger is used, that in that case, the challenger is using, and many people believe that challenger is using Democrat Party resources, perhaps purloined lists, against that incumbent judge in that case. In my case, I have party lists. Mine were not purloined. Mine were obtained through the process under the Republican Party Minnesota Constitution for me to receive the recommendation and the access to the data center. So I'm not hiding it from anybody. I have that recommendation. I received it, and that is a privilege that I get to use the data, and I didn't purloin the data. It's some in private. A lot of lawyers don't have a problem with me doing this, and I have a wide variety of acquaintances as lawyers and friends. Many of them are Democrats. There's a lot of Democrat lawyers in Minnesota. Now, my Democrat friends who are lawyers are all like, hell yeah, this is the way to do it, Nathan. This is the way you're going to win. And they just know me personally, and they know me as a person and as a lawyer, that it doesn't really matter if I say that I'm a Republican or whatever. Some people say they like a Republican, older conservative type person for a judge because that person, and I've heard this from many people, friends of mine, who would be considered left, because that person, in their minds and in their experience, is more likely, ironically, to stand up to the government and not go along with the government, and to be very skeptical about the application of government power, much more so than somebody who might, speak, maybe pay that lip service, maybe pretend that they do, but when it really comes down to it, to kick a hard case. There's cases out there, and I got to be careful about particular cases, but there's cases out there that have been brought here, high profile cases, criminal cases that have been brought, that sometimes some people, I know a lot of lawyers in private, believe they should have been dismissed before the trial stage, and they weren't. And the reason why they weren't dismissed is because somebody just didn't have the temerity to do it. They were, afraid of people calling them and harassing them, or questioning their decision, or what other people might think of them for making that decision, even if it was a decision that was solidly based in the law. And I think that I think that being honest about your beliefs reflects an inner security and the ability to exert a real skepticism about the application of power, whether it be the power of large institutions, any large institution, whether it be private or government or some unit of government. There's a lot of power out there, and there's a lot of little people. And really, when you really think about it, every single judicial proceeding, whether it be civil or criminal, because there's contempt remedies in civil cases, the potential end of every legal case is men with guns and jails or prisons for contempt. And I think that people need to realize that you are the arbiter in between that and these parties that are before the court. You're deciding something very significant. I mean, that the smallest little civil case can end up with somebody in jail. I've had people in jail that I've handled contempt matters relating failure to disclose for debtors. I've had warrants, we have debt warrants in Minnesota for failure to disclose. Somebody cannot pay their debts and then not disclose their assets, and then end up with a warrant out against them and end up in jail. I've handled many types of cases like that. People can be in civil contempt for any type of disobeying a court order. Because if they're lawful orders, people can be in contempt of court. And of course, criminal cases can land people in jail or prison, depending on the nature of the case.
So let me ask you a question. So you're in a campaign. You got 40 days left, right? What kind of campaign is your opponent running against you? Does she bring up anything? Do they talk about anything? Are they playing fair? Are they playing nonpartisan? What exactly are they doing against you?
Well, I told you I heard from an attorney friend of mine, who's a close friend, a good friend, and he's a Democrat. And he said, because I was calling him about something we're working on together, and he said, about your campaign. He said, I was at this person's house down by Hastings, and she had received a sample ballot that said, these are the fellow Democrats you can vote for. And apparently my opponent's name was on that ballot as for a Democrat to vote for. Now, I have not, despite my efforts, been able to run that down yet. So I want to be, until I run that down, that's just a rumor. But I say that the source of that is a lawyer friend of mine, who's a close friend of mine, who's a Democrat, and supporting me here. So I don't think that would have been that came from not my opponent's campaign. As far as I've been able to see with my opponent's campaign, there's been letters to the editor that they've gotten published. That's very normal for a judicial election, letters to the editor from retired judges. I think they've done some ad purchasing, some digital ad purchasing. And then there's like a Facebook page that isn't very active. It's not been as active as my campaign. I'm expecting that maybe she did raise a significant sum of money, I think around $25,000 or so. A lot of it appeared to be from her family and friends. And so she's probably got more money than me, but she doesn't have she's got incumbent next to her name. In Minnesota, on the ballot, it shows up as a nonpartisan election on the backside of the ballot, and the incumbent gets an incumbent next to their name. Now, it's kind of funny and prescient that this subject should come up now, because we're talking about elections and problems with ballots in Minnesota. Now, just today in Dodge County, Minnesota, which is southern Minnesota, down by, down toward Rochester, where the Mayo Clinic is. It's Dodge, Fillmore, Olmsted counties. Dodge County is a county that adjoins where the Mayo Clinic is located. And they made a mistake on their ballot there and didn't put incumbent next to a judicial candidate. That does not involve my race. It involves statewide judicial races, I think a Court of Appeals race and some Supreme Court races. There's other people running against incumbents, none with the party recommendation, though. So they had to file, Dodge County just filed, I put it out on my Twitter, they filed I have a copy that somebody sent me a copy of it. A petition with the Supreme Court to correct the ballot. So in Minnesota, we're already having problems with our ballot. The causes of those, I do not know. All I can do is cite to just that this isn't, this is something that that Dodge County's made a petition for. In this case, the incumbent is there next to people's names to help the incumbent, presumably. In this case, the incumbent was taken away from the incumbent judge on the ballot, and it would probably work to help her opponent in that case, or his or her opponent, depending on the race that you're talking about.
So many ballot issues, so many election issues. Always, you see that they're cleaning up registry polls, and North Carolina took 794,000 people off since 2020. So it's just fascinating to me. So
I was involved in an election case here. If you want to hear about that,
yes, please. Let's get into some of your cases, because this is this. I want to make sure you're expanding on the things, because you're talking to the voters right now. So talk to them.
So I was, I'm kind of, some people have described me as a street lawyer, even though I have an appellate record. I've done a lot of appeals too, mostly civil. I was contacted in 2020 by an old friend, an acquaintance, who's a partner in a law firm in DC, in Washington, DC. And he said, Nathan, our firm needs we need an elector as a plaintiff. And so if those of you that may or may not be aware, an elector is somebody that's chosen by the party to be a member of the Electoral College to elect the president. It is the Electoral College that eventually elects the president. What we'd had happen here in Minnesota, and this was something that was duplicated all around the country, this is done in different states, is we get, in this case, it was Democrats. I'm not sure if it was Republican, but in this case, this was a Democrat operation to change the election laws. In this case, and then they do it not by changing the statute through the legislature, the traditional means by which one would seek to change a law, but rather judicially. So there's groups where there's a lot of money. Some would say it's dark money. I think it probably is, where they get a group of Democrat activists to sue a Democrat. At least in our case here, we have a Democrat Secretary of State, Steve Simon. Maybe they sue Republican ones too and win that way. But they bring a lawsuit, and then they say in this case it was a COVID lawsuit, and they said, there's a virus here. There's a virus, so we need to change the election laws in all these different ways because there's a virus. And so they brought that suit initially in federal court, and then they were kicked out of federal court. I think that maybe the federal judge got hip to what they were doing. You have to have a real case or controversy to sue each other. The law isn't really designed to have two friendly people with a wink and a nod sue each other and say, don't throw me in the briar patch. Let's do a consent decree right now and change the law. Well, they weren't able to accomplish their consent decree in federal court. So then they sued in Ramsey County here in Minnesota, which is where our capital's located. And so then these important cases relating to the governments are venued there on the trial court level, generally. And they did get their consent decree there. They drew a judge who was previously our Senator Amy Klobuchar's field director. So somebody who I don't think it would be disputed that this is a person who potentially sympathetic to such things. And she did enter that consent decree. And then the purpose of that consent decree was in place. Now, there were people that tried to intervene in it and stop it, but the two friendly parties got together. And one of the major parts of that consent decree they entered into was that they wanted to accept ballots after the election day. They wanted to accept ballots by mail after the election day and count those ballots. So what we did with it, and I was just local counsel and I was on the ground. These guys, I want to be careful about what I say. These guys in DC who wrote these briefs and these motions, these are some of the best lawyers. I couldn't believe how good of lawyers these guys were. It was such a privilege to be involved with them, to have my name on the briefs. I mean, it's really a cool thing. And to watch them do their oral arguments is incredible. So we brought this lawsuit in federal court to undo the state court consent decree. And I recruited an elector. We had two electors as plaintiffs. One was a guy named James Carson, a longtime Republican activist that I know, that I've known for many years. So I called him and said, would you be a plaintiff in this? Because the people get these election cases kicked out all the time because they say, well, you don't have standing to sue. Well, my guys had a theory that they did have standing to sue as electors, because the electors would be harmed by this consent decree. And so then another one was recruited, a guy named Eric Lucero, who's now a state senator, who in my district now where I'm running. And so he was also our client. So we brought that to the district court, in the federal district court, and we lost in the federal district court. And I think it was that they said that we didn't have standing. It's a very common way to kick people out of federal court. We appealed. There was a very quick appeal to the Eighth Circuit. And and that is the court, the federal court. Those are Article III judges for life, in between the trial courts and the United States Supreme Court. So we had a panel of 3 judges. One was a former Minnesota Supreme Court justice named David Strauss, and who's now on the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals. We won that case. And that's a published case, and that's a well-known case that they had to segregate those ballots, and they could not be counting those. They had to segregate those ballots and not be counting those ballots after the election day. What's kind of funny, and it felt like I was living in the Twilight Zone. So I was signed up on the e-filing because I'm local counsel. One day an amicus brief pops up, or a motion for an amicus brief, and then a subsequent amicus brief. Amicus curiae brief is a friend of the court brief. This is somebody who wants to raise their hand and say, hey, I have some ability to share our opinions about what the law is here, and to be a friend of the court. Amicus curiae means friend of the court. And so most of the time, judges will entertain that because they say, well, that's just somebody else sharing their opinion about what the law is. Maybe they can shine the light on the subject. Well, none other, and it seems unbelievable. You'd think I was lying, but you can look it up. It exists. Arnold Schwarzenegger moved to file an amicus brief against us. And he did.
The governor. Yeah.
We defeated the Arnold Schwarzenegger.
You terminated the Terminator. That's outstanding.
I just thought that was. I told my daughter that tonight about that. She said that didn't happen. I go, yes, it did.
Listen, be proud of your dad. I took down Arnold.
Right. These guys that handled the oral argument, I mean, they were the level of lawyering. And I mean, I'm kind of a student of it myself after doing it for 20 years. I mean, the level of appellate lawyering of these guys. I mean, some of these people have such high skills. It's unbelievable. And I would say those lawyers that they had on the other side, these are strong lawyers that go and handle these things. Very, very highly skilled lawyers.
We watch a lot of the Supreme Court, oral arguments. I watch a lot of that stuff. And you have to be like the best of the best, because Gorsuch and Thomas and those guys, when they get you in the crosshairs, and if you've stepped out of line just a little bit, oh boy, that has to be a very lonely feeling for an attorney to be, or a lawyer to be up there in the crosshairs of one of those guys.
Our guy, so this was over Zoom, so it was COVID before the 8th Circuit, and I got to watch. Our guy sat alone in his apartment in DC with just a camera on him.
Uh,
No notes. Chapter and verse.
wow.
Case citations, everything. I
Jesus.
was like, wow. I was just shocked. Just the skill level was just off the charts. And I mean, these other lawyers were pretty good too. I mean, they have there's some strong lawyers here. So yeah, I was involved in that case, and that actually I do some local counsel copyright federal work too, litigation, and some copyright related case that I've got. And I think in their complaint they cited Carson v. Simon, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. Oh, it's kind of a famous case. I was local counsel. I wasn't the guy doing all the brief writing and oral arguing. So I don't want to overstate myself there, but
doesn't matter. You were on it. You were there.
I was privileged to be a part of it, and then for those guys to have included me in that, I was very happy that they did.
Tell me a little bit about the Larvita. I'm going to try to say her last name.
McFarquhar.
Okay.
McFarquhar.
Tell me. I was going to have PLP say that one because she's better at names than I am. Hold on. Say it again for us, Nathan.
Larvita McFarquhar.
McFarquhar.
McFarquhar. Like
Okay.
Quhar. McFarquhar.
Okay. All right. Tell us a little bit about that case.
So Larvita is she's a lady. She lives in western Minnesota. And we had very, very severe lockdowns from Tim Walz.
You're going to like this one, PLP. You're going to like this one.
It lasted for a long, long time. And seemingly would never end. And it was just one absurdity after another. Walz left a candy store open. What some people that was somehow people said it was somebody that was his friend. I don't know if that was proven or not, but I've never gone to that candy store again. It's supposed to be the world's candy store. After that happened, I'll never go there again after they did that. I have a lot of feelings like that about a lot of places, depending on how they handled COVID things. There's things I just won't do anymore as a result of that. So Larvita, she kept her restaurant open during the lockdowns. And so she was sued by Jan Malcolm, our Department of Health commissioner, who, as an aside, ended up being vaccine injured later on from the COVID vaccine.
Jesus.
Became a public thing. So they were going around and monitoring people. They brought a civil case against Larvita to get an injunction to shut her down. Now, the judge I was assigned is the one from Carson v. Simon, Amy Klobuchar's former field director.
Uh-oh.
So I don't know if any judge would have been any better, but what I did, she raised some money, and then we had a lot of other litigation going on here. I mean, in Minnesota, some of it with some merit, and some not. We had a lot of arbitrary lockdown stuff here. I mean, with Tim Walz's wife, we got in emails making some decisions.
You can't say it, but I can. That woman's a little bit crazy. I'm just going to say.
Well, she was making some of our COVID decisions. We got that in some of my friends got that in a Data Practices Act request. They said the first lady wants this and that some of the decisions were just made by Gwen Walz. So they bring a petition to shut down Larvita to get an injunction against her. So it goes around, and then at the same time, there's people bringing offensive lawsuits, right? Then you get down to this tricky standing issue and all these things. And I litigated for a long time. I mean, I have now and then before that point. And I thought, if you really want to test these things, one of the ways to try to test it is to come up with some sort of novel, legitimate defense and litigate about that and try to get discovery in the case. And there you can start asking questions because nobody was getting discovery. So I took Larvita's case on, and one of the defenses I raised was an equal protection argument, and that is equal protection of the laws of the United States under the 14th Amendment. So some people might not be aware of this if you're from other places, but and I have to be careful what I say, but it's just a fact. Minnesota is home to the richest or the second richest Indian tribe in the United States. The so-called Loyal Sioux after the Dakota, there was a big Dakota conflict here where they were going to hang a bunch of people. And Lincoln pardoned them and pardoned a whole bunch of people and only hung 30. And then there were some other people that were found to be Loyal Sioux that were not involved in the rebellion in the 1860s. This is during the Lincoln administration, obviously. Even President Lincoln was involved. Well, these people were given a reservation in the south of the Twin Cities, what is now the Twin Cities, in Scott County, down by Shakopee. Well, this particular Indian tribe is very wealthy. There's some other wealthy ones here. They have a lot of influence in our Minnesota government. Lieutenant Governor Flanagan is an enrolled member of the White Earth Reservation. They have a lot of influence because of the gambling, the Native American gambling, and the pacts that were made in the 80s between Governor Perpich and these tribes. And so they've become very, very wealthy, and they're very influential in the government here. Against gambling expansion and probably on other topics as well. This is a very influential group of people. And I'm very well aware of it. I've practiced in these tribal courts as well, so I know what's up with them. So I raised the defense. What happened during the lockdowns is Tim Walz didn't close down the bars and restaurants on the Indian reservations. He left all those open. Now, the first thing people say to people is they say, the governor, they say the state doesn't, this is what people think, and they're wrong. They say the state doesn't have any power to close down, to do anything on the reservations. Well, this isn't true at all. I mean, if you think that the people that designed the taking the land from the Indians would also just make treaties that would say, and laws that would say, well, we're just going to let them do whatever they want, you would be gravely mistaken, and you would be foolishly not taking a close look at history. There is a provision in law from the 1930s under, I think it's 25 USC United States Code 231 that specifically allows for the state governors to be involved in sanitation things on the reservation, education things on the reservation. Furthermore, there's a Minnesota statute under where he was exerting his emergency powers under Chapter 13 of the Minnesota statute, which further specifically contemplates the governor using such powers on Indian reservations. All it says is he just has to consult with the tribal administrator or whoever is the person in charge there before he does it. It just says he has to consult with them. He can consult with them and say, I'm doing this, and it's too bad, and he can do it. So the government's first arguments to my defense was that they didn't have the power to do it. Well, let's set that aside for a minute, okay? In their petition to shut down Larvita, they had a sworn affidavit from a guy named Richard Danila. Richard Danila was the chief deputy epidemiologist for the Department of Health in Minnesota. This is a man who would speak with the science, whisper to the science. He would know the science, hang out with the science. Science, science, science. I heard this all the time about all the stuff they were doing. All I heard was science. Oh, we're doing the science. This is what the science says. Well, at this point, as this got more heated, some friends of mine joined my litigation. They had another source of funding to help fund fighting this litigation because other people with funding liked my ideas here. So I had my friends join me, which I'm happy to do. I don't have any particular pride. I have pride in my work, but I don't have any selfishness about it. I'm very happy to work as a team. I'm a team player. I'm easy to work with in a work context. So, and we all had a common goal here, which was to fight this stuff. So, my friend, we started saying, well, we want discovery in this case. We want to start asking you questions about what you're doing. We want to ask you why it is that you would close down everything else and leave the Indian reservations open. Now, at the same time, just so you build up your case right, just as a side note, I had my Twitter followers, they volunteered to go to the reservations that were open and take pictures and say, I'm such and such a person. I was here on this date and this casino was open. This is a picture I took. because you've got to build the record, because the first thing they'll say to you is you haven't submitted any proof that these people are actually open. So I had that. I made sure I added into the file that these people were open. Furthermore, so we started with them. We said, well, we want to ask questions. We want to take the deposition of this Richard Danila guy. Now, a deposition is where you can sit somebody down in litigation and you can ask them questions for generally up to, in Minnesota, I think it's 7 hours. So you can just ask them all kinds of questions about the litigation. And in this case, they brought the case. We fought for this. Sam did the motion practice. At this point, Sam Deal did that. Cross Castle firm did the motion practice. We negotiated and got the deposition. And then the person who was funding him said, they wanted Sam to take the deposition, which is fine with me. He takes a good deposition. Sam Deal's a brilliant lawyer. Those guys, Cross Castle, were Donald Trump's lawyers here in Minnesota. And Nick Nelson that works with them, is probably, to my knowledge personally, I think the best appellate writer in Minnesota that I know of, that I've met. And he was Donald Trump's lawyer here. And he prevailed for Donald Trump. So anyways, this is a high level of guys over at Cross Castle. These are friends of mine. So they fought us on, they didn't want Richard Danila. In fact, the guy that signed their petition, this isn't a guy we dreamed up. We found out in discovery. This is a guy who swore under oath, we're doing all this because of this, because I know the science. And so we got the deposition of Richard Danila. And it was deposed remotely over Zoom. And Sam took his deposition for 7 hours. And I want to say before this, I gotta rewind a little bit, because there's a plot twist to this. Larvita was in touch with all these activists at Children's Defense Fund. This is another thing that seems unbelievable, like I'm making up, but it's true. Sometimes I feel like Forrest Gump, sort of on the sidelines of things, a little tangentially,
Right.
So Larvita says, she said, RFK Jr. wants to talk to you guys because you're the only people in the country who have gotten a deposition. You're the only ones. And we talked to RFK Jr. This was over 3 years ago, before he was involved in any of the stuff here. And he wanted to talk to us about his thoughts about what the things we should ask about at the deposition. He called me on my cell phone. I have his cell phone number. And he's a fantastic lawyer, that guy. That guy's a really smart lawyer. His dad was attorney general, and I don't think practiced very much. I think RFK Jr.'s probably a better lawyer, maybe just by, even though his dad was attorney general, maybe a better lawyer than his dad was. Maybe that's just played out as a result of him, living longer. But that guy's a fantastic lawyer. So RFK Jr. consulted with his thoughts on what we should be asking about at that deposition. Sam, I have the transcript. We've made it available before. I've shared it with other people. Sam did a fantastic job over 7 hours. And the long and the short of it, first of all, Richard Danila, we had his whole Twitter history, which was all Democrat stuff, all Democrat partisan stuff.
I'm sure.
Richard Danila's Twitter. It was all, so Sam went through all that stuff, which just tortured the guy. And then if you read the deposition, I watched it live. That guy, even though he was the chief deputy epidemiologist, that guy didn't really know anything about anything related as to why they were making certain decisions.
A lot of that going around.
Yeah, just absolutely. And really, if I came away with the conclusion that decisions were being made somewhere else and just handed down to people. And that's because whatever the decisions were, this guy who swore out the affidavit, who is the chief deputy epidemiologist, sure as hell had no idea or any participation in the decisions that were being made, or why the decision was made to leave the Indian reservations, restaurants and bars open while closing everyone else's. So of course they were packed during this. So we lost substantively before Judge Gruing in Ramsey County, and I appealed it to the Minnesota Court of Appeals. And I made this equal protection argument. Now their argument's changed.
Uh-oh.
Now they had to concede that they actually did have the power to close down the reservations, because I pointed that out pretty abundantly. And I did go back and reread the Minnesota Court of Appeals decisions the other day. They just said the other day, it was that Tim Walz had a rational basis to leave the restaurants and bars open on the Indian reservations. They said there was a rational basis for it, so the Indian tribes could govern their own affairs. Well, I mean, I could see maybe if the Indian tribes like locked down and said, well, we're not letting anybody in. And, you know, our own members can go to our facilities or something like that, and we're going to keep it like that. But they were wide open, and they were the only place open, and they were packed. And this was never covered really in our media or anything. I think they covered after I lost. And then we eventually forced them to bring a motion to dismiss. And we wouldn't voluntarily dismiss it. We forced them to bring a motion to dismiss their case. And they had to bring a motion because they changed. They said, oh, we're changing some of the lockdown orders now. So the stuff you're complaining about is moved. We're reopening stuff. And I think we forced them to bring a motion to dismiss.
Well, you got them to say uncle, and that's a wonderful thing. That's a great thing.
We brought them pretty far there. I mean, and really that was a way that now for history, I mean, instead of suffering in silence, we have it now documented what they did. This is enshrined in a court decision. People will look back. I was right on the law on that. There was no reason for them to do that. I know we lost, but you know, that's just what happens sometimes. And that was another case where that was either somebody might construe the decision as political. Some might construe the decision as, you know, maybe an unwillingness to, under the force of the government to tell them to do that. But really, as a common sense matter, if you look at that, if you accept the proposition that there's this virus that's killing everybody, I remember telling the judge on the record there, I said, I can drive right down I-35 for 20 minutes and I can be in a restaurant eating a steak. I said, everything else is closed.
Right.
And this was really, if you look at it in context, I mean, it was ultimately a political decision. We see from the Court of Appeals and the position that Attorney General Allison had to change, they had to admit that they had the power to do it, and they didn't.
So Nathan, you seem like an awesome guy. You seem like a great guy. You know the law. I think you got a good handle on what's happening there in Minnesota. So as we end the interview, as we close up here, take the last couple of minutes and just like talk to the people that would be watching that are on the fence. Why should they vote for you to be this judge in the 10th District, Seat 3? What is it that's going to make them come over to you? And you've talked about empathy. You've talked about a lot of things. You know the law. You're standing up for the little guy. You're doing a lot of things that would make me want to like you, and I don't really like attorneys, so no offense.
A lot of people don't. My mom's a lawyer, and you know, other than my mom and a couple of close friends, I'm not a big fan of them myself.
Yeah, so spend a couple of minutes, and then I'll let PLP wrap up with the last question, and then I think the people will be interested, and I think they'll like what they've heard here tonight. So wrap us up. Tell us a little bit about why.
Well, first of all, given the context of this being the America First Patriot Hour, I would hope that given my background there that you'd want to support me. But maybe enthusiastically, maybe I could make a greater appeal for some enthusiastic support. If there's anybody watching here that resides in, he's got it. Thank you at the bottom. Washington, Anoka, Pine, Isanti, Chisago, Kanabec, Sherburne, or Wright counties. Mm-hmm. This goes across from sort of the east of the Twin Cities up along the north of the Twin Cities. And like I said, Pine County goes, southern Washington County, where I live, goes all the way down to Hastings, real far south. And then Pine County goes almost to Duluth. I think that what I would bring to the table here is, first of all, this would be a historical thing. I mean, this was done in 2010 before where without a partisan election, a judge was able to defeat another incumbent judge in this district. But I think people often don't realize how important this can be, even though I wouldn't be, on the Supreme Court deciding big, huge things or anything. I would be involved in the day-to-day problems that people have. And if you have a friend or a family member who has had a protracted run-in with the justice system, no matter what it might be, and maybe had a negative experience about it, which it can be that it can go that way, or maybe you felt disrespected in it, or you thought that if the way that the process by which it was ridiculous. I want to apply a semblance of dignity, respect, sanity. I want my dockets to run well. I want people to be treated well. I want to follow the law. I'm not going to be, even though and that means where it takes me. If it's an uncomfortable conclusion that I have to come to, it is the conclusion I have to come to, and I think you just have to accept that. In addition, with regard to public safety matters, like I said, I worked for corrections. For 4.5 years before I went to law school. I have a lot of knowledge of the criminal justice system. I worked in records for like a year records, and then I worked in interstate, then I worked in field services, and then grants and subsidies too. And I've read, we had base files. This was in the mid to late 90s. And we had base files at central office, and I've read so many files of infamous things, and I just have an understanding of things. And I have an understanding of people. And I think that there's certain things that come about, and I got to be careful about saying how I'm going to rule, but I'm going to say this generally. There are some things that come about that you have a duty to civilization and to the people around you to put some people away. Some people, I know this from working at corrections, are very dangerous. Some things that they do are very dangerous. And I think that I have the street smarts from being around. I've visited probably in my practice. I've done a lot of criminal work, probably 30, 40 jails. And I've been to every prison except for one or two, not as an inmate, as a lawyer. And I think that I have enough knowledge from being around. I'm 48 years old now, that I'm going to have an understanding to make some of these difficult calls about things, and to make decisions that help contribute to the type of community that I want to live in, and that I think other people want to live in. And I mean that seriously. And I mean, because people come to court, and I don't want to. I want to listen to people's arguments. I don't want to give their arguments short shrift. And I want to be careful, and I want to be respected by everybody that comes before me. If I do win this, there'll be a lot of people who are mad at me. I already know that there's certain people that are really mad at me. And well, this is democracy, right?
That's right. You're not doing something right if people aren't pissed off at you. It's just my motto in life. That's just the way it is.
You're very true about it. It's very accurate. That's one thing I've realized. If you're out there doing stuff, there's just going to be some people who are mad. There's going to be you're going to run into some trouble. That's life. That's just what it is. And
if you're following the law, then you're going to be something very unique, because there's a lot of people that's politically motivated, and it's not the law anymore, and we're sick of seeing that. So, PLP, any questions you have or comments for Nathan?
No questions. Just, I'll be honest. I went on a very long Twitter rant this evening about not voting for incumbents. So I hope the people of Minnesota realize that giving somebody, fresh a chance is always a good thing in our political system. And to me, anyone who stood up against COVID tyranny would have my vote. One of the most disgusting chapters in American history. We will be judged very harshly for what happened during that time, and I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you so much for the kind words.
So, Nathan, do us a favor. Now we kind of feel like we are tied to the hip with you here on this, because we bring America First Patriots on. And we want to see good people win, because you said something earlier. You said, I'm not going to be on the Supreme Court. But listen, it starts all the way down at the school boards and the parents and city council and then judges, attorneys, and before you can get to the appellate court or the district courts or get to the places, that some people are. If good people are in those positions, then there's a hell of a lot better chance that outcomes are going to be lawful and they're going to be fair. And that's what I think Americans are hungry and thirsty for today.
Well, I think that one of the things I'm somewhat riding the wave of is during the COVID stuff, not only the stuff that I did, but in general, people had some city council members. So I have a recommendation for a nonpartisan race. City council, school board, judges in Minnesota, the way it's set up on the ballots, these are considered nonpartisan races. As a practical matter, in our bigger cities and a lot of other cities, at least in the Twin Cities area, these people are all functionally Democrats. In the other areas, you would get Democrats that would organize to run for these things, and then they would be involved in school board tyranny and school board, maybe city council stuff. So what I found here is the Republican parties, where there's areas of my district, like I live in kind of a purple area, and then Anoka is less purple as it goes north, and then it just goes red, like 75% Republican. And those people in those areas would get a couple people on their school boards or their city councils that were not making decisions in a manner that they believed was consistent with the way their community wanted decisions to be made. So now they're all about, like, there's people that they do these sample ballots in these outstate areas. And like, I think I'm on sample ballots with people for school board. So they've got Nathan Hansen for judge, somebody for school board, somebody for soil and water conservation district, somebody for city council or in a particular city, because these people were like, well, we saw, just to your point, you saw the practical effect of the total domination of every level of the government to impose these things on people, where people, you have to step up and do these things. And it starts with these little things. I mean, if I can make a positive effect in people's lives and I'm doing the job that should be done in the way that it should be done, and protecting people's rights against big institutions, against big government, against harassment, then I think I've moved the ball forward. I mean, I don't.
Well, we are pulling for you. So everyone, Nathan Hansen, he's running for the 10th Judicial District, Seat 3, 8 counties. On his website, the last sentence he has is flip the ballot.
Yes.
And I think we need to do that. So, Nathan, thank you. It's been an honor to have you on, and good luck to you, sir. We hope that you win.
Thank you so much for having me on and taking the time. It was a pleasure to meet you guys.
Hey, we'll have you back on when you win, okay?
Thank you so much. Bye.
Take care. All right, POP.
That was like a little inside baseball, it was like stepping into the movie Fargo, a little inside Minnesota baseball. So that was.
It is. It was the nonpartisan thing was a very interesting component.
Yeah, it's kind of a farce, in my opinion, which is why I brought it up. In addition, stacking the deck by pointing out who's an incumbent seems very unfair to me, but none of that surprises me in a blue state that's as misguided as Minnesota.
Yeah, I'm pulling for the guy. You can tell he's apple pie Chevrolet. He's a guy that's going to follow the law, and that's important. And even it's tough for me, and I'll say for the record, it's tough to listen to legal conversation sometimes. But it's good for me to see a guy who, he cares. He cares deeply about the law and about trying to make the right decision. And even if that means pissing off some people, which, hey, you can't do any of this and do it well without somebody being angry at you.
Right.
So, PLP, we're going to get you out of here somewhat early. So, guys, we appreciate you. This was a special America First Patriot Hour. We are trying to get people in front of you guys, especially with only 39 days till the election starting tomorrow. There's a lot happening. The whole Iranian ground-to-air missiles that they're talking about now, trying to take out Trump Force One. That's just something I've seen on Twitter, so you guys will have to read about it. They want to take the man out because that's the only friggin' chance they got. Their internal polls are gone. She can't talk. She can't do an interview. Even Stephanie Rule, who's about as blue as my toe after I smash it, she was even asking her questions like, well, how the hell are you going to do that if you don't raise federal taxes? So she's gone. She's a puppet. She's fulfilling basically a figurehead position. I've said from day one, and when I'm right, you guys aren't going to be able to live with me for about 3 or 4 days, because I am going to throw this shit in your guys' faces so many times, because I've told you they are throwaway candidates. Tim Walz, oh my God. It gives me nightmares to think that those two could actually even be in the government, much less run the presidency. So a lot's going to happen. We got to keep Trump safe. Let's make sure we can do that. PLP, Lenny, final last thoughts?
Nope. I'll be fine with you being right as long as we won.
We're going to win. It's just going to be carnage after the fact. So, my friends, stand tall, be accountable. Don't let them take your hope. We're the ones stepping all over them right now. We will keep trying to get great people in front of you. I don't care what level they are. And we will continue to grow the America First Patriot Hour. Tonight, it's streamed live on Rumble, X, and YouTube. And it did have a little bit of a flicker there, didn't it? I don't know if that was his camera or ours, but I'll take a look at it. I hope everybody liked it. We're well over 1,500 views, so I'm guessing people liked it. So until, God, what is it? Sunday, for the Sunday night wrap-up with the POP. You guys make sure you roar loud enough they can hear you. And they can. See you guys Sunday.